Here in Britain we have a newspaper called The Guardian, whose reputation as a sanctimonious mouthpiece for the great multicultural contrick is now being eclipsed by a more rancid reputation for anti-Semitism. The Guardian used to represent what used to be called the liberal tradition, and at one time it could be relied on for reasonably balanced coverage, sloping to the left of course, but in a fair way, an honest way. Those days have gone. Nowadays, The Guardian has become so obsessed with the state of Israel and has come to hate it with such a lopsided Scandinavian intensity that it's lost all sense of proportion. Nowadays, The Guardian publishes writers who engage in anti-Semitic slurs. It willingly acts as a propaganda platform for the murdering terrorists of Hamas, and it misrepresents the facts in the Middle East to persuade its readers to support a fascist religious war of hate against a genuine democracy where Arabs and Jews have equal rights, although you'll never hear about that in The Guardian, whose writers prefer to push the lie, the fiction of the apartheid state. When it was forced to respond to repeated accusations of being anti-Semitic, The Guardian seemed a lot more concerned with the possible damage to its reputation than with whether or not anti-Semitism is a bad thing, when I think we all know that if Muslims were complaining about Islamophobia, they'd be trampling over each other at The Guardian to put things right. But Jews, meh. And what all this means is that if you let it be known that you read The Guardian, it now says something about you that, on reflection, you may not want it to say. In short, The Guardian is now stigmatising its own readers. Not that many of them don't do a fine job of stigmatising themselves. Guardian readers are, in the main, educated, middle-class people who regard themselves as liberal, leftish, intellectual types, not the common clay, as it were, and many of them inhabit a rarefied bubble of hypocrisy that only they seem unaware of. For example, they call themselves liberal, yet they're often the most enthusiastic about censoring the opinions of others, which is about the most illiberal thing you can do. This is because The Guardian is written by and for the same narrow class of patronising know-it-all pinheads who've stolen the BBC from the rest of us and destroyed its impartiality. The kind of people who are so smug in their shallow certainties and so sure of the moral superiority of their views that they have no compunction about slandering anyone who disagrees as a fascist or a crank. Such as the BBC's hatred of Israel, by the way, that they couldn't even give it a capital city in their Olympic guide, yet they gave one to the Palestinians, who haven't even got a country and never will have, the way they're going about it. Both The Guardian and the BBC are part of what's called the progressive consensus, under whose auspices the language has been systematically emasculated, and words like tolerance and fairness and diversity and, well, progressive, no longer mean what they say. In each case, the shell of the word is still there, but it's been hollowed out and filled with something altogether less savoury and actually quite sinister. In this artificial PC newspeak world, the feckless and the stupid, for example, are never referred to as feckless or stupid because that might damage their self-esteem. Instead, they're called disadvantaged and vulnerable, which renders them victims and, as such, automatically virtuous. And we all know by now that the golden rule for virtuous victims is that they should never be required to take responsibility for their actions or their circumstances. It must always, somehow, be somebody else's fault. It's what I call the Palestinian syndrome, and it saturates The Guardian from cover to cover. So who reads The Guardian? Multiculties, liberal lefties, touchy-feely, bleeding hearts. Is that a stereotype? I do hope not. The kind of people who cause 10 times as many problems as they solve because they're so willfully naive on everyone else's behalf. People who throw the words racist and Islamophobe around like monkeys with their own feces, and who love diversity but make sure their own kids go to a school where everybody speaks English. Maybe you know some fossilised old lefty who's still mentally wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. You can bet your life they read The Guardian. And you probably know one of those comically self-righteous anti-capitalists with a mortgage and a pension. There's another Guardian reader. Self-hating Jews who support the Palestinians, women and gay people who defend Islamic misogyny and homophobia, all read The Guardian, and you know you're firmly in Guardian territory when you find yourself being lectured on social justice by some middle-aged, university-educated prick who spent his whole life on the dole. Guardian readers are the kind of people who gravitate to the high moral ground on just about every issue because their values, being leftish liberal values, are automatically more virtuous than everybody else's. So virtuous are they, in fact, that they appear to be impregnable even to the stigma of anti-Semitism if it's in a good cause. And there is no better cause for a committed Guardianista, no cause more holy, meaning more fashionable to support at dinner parties, than romanticising the murdering terrorists of Hamas as freedom fighters, when freedom is actually what they're fighting against. The Guardian and its sheep-like readers agonise endlessly about the poor Palestinians while maintaining a rigorous ideological blindness to the core problem, which is that the Jews want peace and the Arabs don't, because the Arabs are driven primarily by religious hatred. So whatever the Jews concede will never, ever be enough, because the Arabs want blood. They want the Jews dead. They don't want a two-state solution, Guardian readers. They want a one-state solution with no goddamn Jews in it, and they've repeatedly made it crystal clear that they will settle for nothing less. Is everybody deaf? So if this is your position, and if you support Hamas, as The Guardian does, it is definitely your position. Sieg Heil, anyone? Then you need to be a bit more honest about your position and admit that what you're supporting ultimately is religious genocide. On the other hand, if it's not your position, then maybe you should do yourself a favour and stop reading The Guardian, because right now, every time you pick that thing up, you leave a film of filth on your soul. Peace, and so on and so forth. Yeah.